Fire. You won't believe what happened when my HOA's most notorious, Karen, decided she had the right to demand my guest cabin for her family's summer stay. But before I jump in, make sure you hit subscribe right now because stories like this are wild and you don't want to miss the next insane twist life throws at me. And trust me, this one spirals so far beyond HOA drama that it ends with DHS black SUVs roaring down my driveway, armed agents fanning out across my lawn while Karen screamed that it was all my fault. And if that doesn't hook you, then nothing will. So let me take you back to the very beginning when I bought a quiet little cabin in the mountains, tucked away in a sleepy gated community that prided itself on its HOA rules and regulations, where lawns had to be trimmed to precise lengths, mailboxes could only be painted one shade of beige, and heaven forbid you parked your car an inch over the line. And at first I didn't mind because I loved the peace and the air smelled like pine and freedom. But then I met Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, who had a permanent scowl etched into her face like she'd been born angry, and she made it clear from day one that she didn't like outsiders buying property in what she called her neighborhood. And when I converted my old toolshed into a cozy guest cabin with a fireplace, kitchenette, and enough charm to make any visitor feel at home, she showed up at my door demanding to see my permits, ranting that it was an eyesore, even though it was objectively adorable. And then she escalated by filing complaint after complaint with the HOA board, none of which stuck, but I could see her eyes light up every time she thought she had me cornered. And then one Friday afternoon, she marched up my driveway, hands on hips, sunglasses glinting like a villain from a bad movie, and told me point blank that her sister's family was coming to visit for 2 weeks, and because there were no hotels nearby, I needed to vacate my guest cabin immediately and let them stay there, free of charge, because that's what good neighbors do. And when I laughed in disbelief, she snapped that if I refused, she would make sure my life became a living hell, which, knowing her, was no idle threat. But I still told her no, and that's when things began unraveling in ways I couldn't have predicted, because 2 nights later I noticed a strange SUV parked across the street, tinted windows, engine idling, and when I stepped outside to investigate, it drove off. And then my mail started arriving already opened, and my Wi-Fi began dropping at odd hours, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Yet I chalked it up to paranoia until the night I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel near the cabin, and when I peeked out, I saw 2 figures in dark clothing retreating into the woods, and the next morning Karen strutted by smirking like she knew something I didn't. And then, out of nowhere, a man in a suit showed up at my door flashing a badge I didn't recognize, asking pointed questions about whether I had unusual visitors, whether I'd noticed drones overhead, whether I'd been approached by anyone asking about the cabin, and I was too stunned to give more than vague answers. But after he left, panic set in because I realized something was going on that had nothing to do with HOA feuds. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get stranger, Karen returned with a clipboard and a smug grin, insisting her relatives were arriving the next day and she'd already told them the cabin was theirs. And when I threatened to call the police, she sneered that the police wouldn't help me because she had friends in higher places, which sounded laughable at first until the very next morning. 3 black SUVs roared up my driveway in formation, doors flying open as armed DHS agents poured out, shouting commands, ordering me to put my hands where they could see them, and the entire neighborhood emerged from their homes, phones recording, gasps filling the air as Karen shrieked, "I told you he was dangerous." While the agents stormed my guest cabin, battering the door off its hinges and swarming inside like they were raiding a cartel hideout, and the whole time I stood frozen on the grass, adrenaline pounding, my mind racing through every possible explanation, wondering if I'd been framed, if Karen had set me up, or if something much bigger was unfolding. And then the lead agent came out holding a small metal case I'd never seen before, muttering into his earpiece with urgency, and Karen rushed forward demanding to know if they'd found the files, which made the agent whirl on her with a glare so sharp it silenced her instantly. And that's when I realized she wasn't just a petty HOA tyrant. She was tangled up in something she didn't understand, and maybe neither did I, because the agent leaned close and said, "You're going to need to come with us," and before I could protest, they shoved me into the back of an SUV and sped away, leaving Karen screaming at the top of her lungs that it was unfair they hadn't arrested her neighbor instead. And what happened next was the beginning of a nightmare I still can't fully believe, because they drove me to a secure facility miles away, interrogated me for hours about my connection to a suspected whistleblower who had apparently used my cabin as a drop point months earlier without my knowledge, and the more I denied it, the more suspicious they seemed, until finally one of them admitted they had surveillance footage of people sneaking onto my property at night, carrying packages into the cabin, which explained the footsteps and the SUVs I'd seen, but didn't explain why Karen seemed to know so much, and that's when the biggest twist landed. They told me she wasn't just a nosy law enforcer, she was actually an informant who'd been feeding them bad intel in exchange for immunity on a completely unrelated fraud case, and she had deliberately painted me as suspicious so the heat would shift away from her, which explained why she was so desperate to get her relatives into the cabin. It wasn't about hospitality, it was about searching for whatever was hidden inside, and when DHS realized she'd been manipulating them, they pivoted fast, releasing me with an apology and redirecting their focus onto her. But by the time they returned to my neighborhood, she and her so-called relatives had vanished, her house emptied overnight, her car abandoned at the airport, and to this day no one has seen her again, though every so often I still catch glimpses of black SUVs in the distance, reminding me that the story isn't over, and that my little mountain getaway became the epicenter of something far more dangerous than law squabbles. So if you think Karen was just an ordinary neighbor from hell, think again, because sometimes the people screaming the loudest about rules and order are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. And if you want to hear what happened after DHS came back a second time, because yes, there's more, make sure you subscribe, because this ride is only just beginning.